questions. Are clerks required to check an ID on everyone, even if they know who you are?
Yes.
Do you have, okay. And do you have any comment on Robin Voss's sworn statement that Tyler Kennedy must go?
I don't want to get in the middle of something, but I can say that our experience with the Government Accountability Board has been good. As I said, we don't always agree with them, but we feel that they have been very fair and very effective. They always listen to all sides. They get a lot of grief from all sides,
Yes.
which makes me think that they're doing something right.
I think Kevin Kennedy has done an excellent job, and I think Robin Voss is completely out of line in saying that. But, okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
I don't have a driver's license. I don't have a birth certificate. Okay, I've got a utility bill or something like that. So I go down to the county clerk and say, I want this, or I go to the DMV, I guess, and I say that I want this ID card. What are they going to do to me? I mean, are they just going to accept what I'm telling them? And how is that different than what we have been doing?
Well, actually, Representative Voss, his first reaction was when the Supreme Court said, you know, you've got to let people get an ID without a birth certificate. His first reaction was, well, you know, how are we going to protect? We can't protect the integrity of the election and so forth. What the process is, a utility bill will help identify where you live. It won't help identify who you are. There are certain things you have to, when you want to get an ID for voting. First of all, if you don't have a driver's license, you don't have an Wisconsin state ID, maybe you have a passport, but it's not likely. Maybe you have a tribal ID, certain tribal IDs, certain, yeah, okay. I mean, I guess my point is there are some other forms, but we also know that there are lots of people who don't have any of those. So then you go to the DMV, you bring things that try to show who you are and who you have been, because that's what they're looking, with a birth certificate, they want to know where did you come from, you know, what, are you a citizen, etc. But, so you might bring things like your early school records or something like that.
I don't have that.
And but the process is then they work with the vital records and they try to ascertain who you are and figure out, oh yes, this is a real person. There was somebody by that name back then. So, and they say they can turn this around in 48 hours. As I said, it was untested when it was allowed to go into effect. Yes.
You mentioned voter suppression, but has any study been done as to how many people are just not going to bother?
That's the unmeasurable. The question is, how many people will just not bother? How many people will just throw up their hands and say, you know, I don't think I can do this. And that's unmeasurable, and I think it will be young people and old people and everything in between.
What is voter suppression? I never heard of that before.
What is voter suppression? Historically, and now, voter suppression is an effort to keep certain people from voting. And it has taken many forms. Back in the early part of the 20th century, it took the form of poll taxes and literacy tests and so forth. This is a more sophisticated approach. I'll go to somebody who has.
Okay, what is indefinitely confined?
Well, actually, the law leaves that up to you to you can say, I am exempt from this law because I'm indefinitely confined.
So does it cover somebody who's in like a nursing home or physically unable?
It would, yeah. Or it could be somebody in their own home. You don't walk, if you walk in on election day and you say you're indefinitely confined, they're not going to believe you, you know. So,
You should be able to vote absentee without birth certificate.
you should be telling the truth if you claim that exemption.
Right, sure,
Yeah.
sure.
Otherwise
City
it would be
clerk
fraud.
makes the rounds of the nursing homes, and there's they are deputy officials of the city clerk who goes with absentee ballots and has the person fill out the ballot.
But if I can't get to the DMV to get what I need,
Well, if you're in a nursing home, you need somebody to, you need ID anyway because you get proper prescriptions in the nursing home.
Well, but that doesn't, that, getting your prescriptions, that's a fallacy to say that you need an ID for this, that, and the other thing. Yeah, you need an ID, but you don't need one of these 7 acceptable IDs to do that. You can have a county ID that's used for social services. You could have, there are various things. If you go into a drugstore, you could bring, what am I thinking, a employee ID badge with your name and photo on it.
I'm hearing of elderly people who think they are not going to be able to vote.
That they're not going to be able to vote, we need to reach out to them and tell them that if they are indefinitely confined, they can vote absentee.
Without.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And it does, they don't have to be in a nursing home. They can be at home if they're indefinitely confined. Yes.
Doesn't, I heard that Indiana does not require an ID for any absentee ballot. Is that accurate? I heard that on, I think on.
I don't know about that. I know that Indiana has, it has a provision where you can sign an affidavit saying that you don't have an ID and you can still get a ballot.
I also heard that when they were talking about, they said that the court said that Wisconsin's law was identical to Indiana, and somebody said absolutely not. And one of the things they said was to vote absentee in Indiana, you do not need an
Really?
ID.
Okay.
That's what I heard. Now I didn't follow up to
Yeah,
see if that was
okay.
accurate.
I don't know.
Can you just clarify, to vote absentee now, you have to go someplace and show an ID?
To vote absentee, you are supposed to, if you're voting by mail, you know, sending in an absentee ballot, you're supposed to include a photocopy of your ID so that they can think about how you probably look and compare it to that picture. Yes.
Um,
I'm sorry, $450,000, I hear a figure of for cost to get awareness through media for this upcoming voter change for ID. And that's one cost. Where's that coming from?
Well, actually, that money was already appropriated for this, for public education. What happened was when the injunctions went into place, the Government Accountability Board did not carry out that campaign. Now, 7 weeks before the election, all of a sudden voter ID is the law of the land. And the GAB was going to go to the Joint Finance Committee and ask to use that money. And there was going to be a vote on it, but I think maybe some people didn't want to vote on it shortly before the election. And so the Joint Finance just said, well, you know, go ahead and do it. So it's not clear what's going to happen. I do know that that money was based on an educational campaign that was going to take place in late 2011, early 2012, and they had negotiated some pretty good prices. Now, you're right before the election, you got all these political ads on TV. It's very hard. I have a friend who has an advertising business, and she said, you basically, it's very hard to get airtime, and you will pay a much higher price for it. Yeah. Sir, you had a question.
Can the observers, if they see something that's irregular, they take a picture or record it?
No, they're
And
not
no,
allowed to.
that's right, no pictures allowed in the polls at this point. That has been something that's been considered, and we do not think that cameras belong in the polling place. But what they can do is, in the polling place, well, the first thing to do is to talk to the chief inspector. You're never, as an observer, you're to stay out of the voting process. And so the first thing is to talk to the chief inspector, not to the voter or the poll workers. If the chief inspector doesn't seem to, be responding, then you can contact. What they do is they contact one of the numbers that we give them, and you can either step outside the poll to do that by phone, or in the poll you can do a text message. And then we kind of assess whether it's something where we ought to call the local official or the GAB or the police, So, there was a question back there? No?
Oh,
Sir?
I had just said about the pictures and stuff. I don't think that's true, because in the very last election that we had, they had it posted right on one of the TV network newses and also in the Janesville Gazette that they could take pictures at the poll. You just can't take a picture of
voters.
of the voter and their ballot. You can take a picture of all the voters, anybody. You can't have them their ballot.
And, yeah. I know that disabilities groups are allowed to take pictures because they're documenting, accessibility issues. But yes, ma'am.
Can you take a copy of your birth certificate rather than the real thing?
It has to be a certified birth certificate.
So it has to be the real thing.
Yeah, real thing.
How many people have those?
It was funny. I suddenly thought, I think that's a certified thing my mother gave me. But it might not be. I had never thought about it. And
When we got our passports for the first time, we thought we had a certified copy and we did not.
yeah,
And we had to send it to Madison, I was born in Madison, he was born in Portage, but we had to do that, and we had to pay.
and it takes time.
And it took time.
Yeah.
And we didn't realize that until we went with what we thought was.
And you don't even realize these things are happening. There's a man, he's actually a professor at Marquette University, whose name is Enrique. And he's about my age, and back in the 60s, he was in school, and probably a very well-meaning teacher decided he would be better off with the name Henry. So she started calling him Henry. And he went by that name for many years and got his Social Security card as Henry. And then at some point he decided, no, really, my parents gave me the name Enrique, and that's what my family calls me, and that's who I am. So he started going by Enrique, and no problem at all, renewed his driver's license, blah, blah, blah. Then the last time he went to renew his driver's license, they said, I'm sorry, sir, but we don't have you in the Social Security records. You're not there. And it's because his Social Security card said Enrique. Said Henry. But nobody had questioned that for years. He had been working, and nobody had questioned it, and all of a sudden it came up. And these are things that can happen shortly before an election and mean the difference between you're getting to vote or not.
One of the groups is being suppressed, and it just really makes me angry that there's whole groups of people that someone decided basically we don't want you to vote. I just can't see it any other way. Right, students. Okay, now my understanding is university-wide, I think people might wonder, they're providing free IDs for students, right?
Upon request.
Upon request. So that's an important thing. If you know any students, make sure that they know that they can get these.
And those will work, but they have to be accompanied by a proof of current enrollment. So you also have to have that, which they can show in an electronic format. They can't do the card has to be real physical thing.
They have to show, right? They can't just show their student ID and this whatever ID they're
It has to be the special voting ID.
Other thing in addition to the special voting?
Yes.
What is proof of enrollment?
I'm sorry?
What qualifies as proof of enrollment?
It's something that the university or college can do. It's, yeah, it's, you know, maybe, I think it's a receipt that shows that you're paid on your tuition or something. I honestly don't know for sure.
And how many students are going to be able to find that?
Well, when they request and go pick up their special voting ID, I would hope that the school would give them instructions on how to use it, you know, in the back. But if they have a Wisconsin driver's license or state ID, they can also use that.
But they have to show where they live on campus then, right?
If they're going to register, they have to do proof of residence. Yeah. In the back?
Yes. You said that the birth certificates shouldn't cost you anything to get a copy of your birth certificate. What if you're from another state?
Well, actually, you won't get a copy of your birth certificate. You won't come out of this process with a copy of your birth certificate. What they will do instead is work with the Vital Records Department to match you up, to match up whatever information you have about your early life with a record of birth that some agency has.
Okay, and even if you're from another state, it won't cost you anything.
That's what they say. It hasn't been tested, and it's, I don't know how the Wisconsin DMV can lean on a government agency in another state and say, you know, you've got to act right away because we need you to. You know, you're sitting in the other state and you're thinking, well, am I going to do that or am I going to serve the people here in my own state? And I've got a job and things to do, and, you know. There was a question, sir?
Isn't it really been ALEC that's been pushing this hard and fast, this voter ID stuff? I mean, aren't they based in Virginia? And you have a lot of Republicans, I guess, belong to ALEC, and so they're getting a lot of these voter ID ideas. Aren't they getting that from ALEC, like a lot of other this outrageous stuff?
I think it's one of the ALEC priorities.
Sure.
Yeah.
I asked a question earlier, maybe I phrased it wrong. I guess what I'm really wondering about is, are there going to be a significant number of people that may wish to vote that because of this current statute, the court ruling won't be able to?
Well, we want to know about anybody who fits into that category,
are there going
but
to be-
we don't know.
Are there
We
going
don't
to be
know.
people
We
like
suspect
that?
there will. You know, we suspect there will, and especially because the time frame has been crunched, it's just much more likely. So we suspect there will, but you know, do I have a crystal ball? No. And so, yeah, sir.
I'm State Representative Andy Jorgensen. What you're asking is everybody is guessing at that. But what we do have is that Judge Edelman a few weeks ago, he had estimated that there's going to be 300,000 registered voters. I want to just repeat that part. Registered voters that won't have the proper identification in order to vote. So that's not eligible voters. I assume that number will be much higher. This is eligible people who voted in the past, are registered, they are all signed up, they think, and they may find out a big surprise.
And like 83% of these are going to be Democrats, right?
Well, we don't know that. There's obviously the initiative is being pushed hard politically, and you can make assumptions on that. I've asked that the DOT secretary open up the DMV hours longer and on the weekends. We don't have that in Wisconsin, only in 2 places. In some areas, there's going to be your DMV is only open 2 days a week, 2 days a month. And in some cases, that DMV center has already done that, and you're not going to be able to use it between now and the election. And as you pointed out, you did a great job, is that the time is the enemy now, because we've got all this going on in a short time to get there. And we don't know all the things that may or may not happen. Some people believe that if you buy into the political part of it, that they'll get some collateral damage in some parts of the state. That people that would have voted for the Republicans won't be able to vote now. Nobody knows for sure. All they know is that, I mean, there's an old rule of thumb. The more people that vote, Democrats win. That one I've heard since I was a little boy. So, I mean, I'm very unscientific, believe me, but obviously somebody's buying into it because it seems to be. I mean, you're not going to allow, I mean, we've got a time crunch here. That means we should allow DMV centers to be open longer and on the weekend. Indiana, by the way, did that when they did their voter ID law. That's what they did right away. In fact, they even made mobile ID centers to be able to go to those places in their state that they knew were going to have a struggle with this, and so that they could show up and get people to vote or their proper identification in order to vote. We don't have that going on in our state. The DOT secretary told me that there are no long lines in the DMV centers around. There's nothing going on, nothing to see here, folks. Well, if you don't have a driver's license, you're not going to be standing in line at the DMV center. It's going to be hard for you to do that. So that's not a rule of thumb you should talk about. He also talks about that, well, there's over 300,000 free IDs we've given. Yes, since 4 years ago when this law came about. Not since Judge Edelman wrote his letter just a few weeks ago, at that time, assessing or estimating the amount of people was 300,000 registered voters don't have the proper identification.
And these are people who have established that they are eligible to vote in our state. They've already established that. And on election day, you could walk in and register to vote and then walk over to the table and not be allowed a ballot that will be counted.
And provisional ballots are another thing too. There's many clerks or many poll workers that never had a provisional ballot. They've been doing it for decades and never had to fill one out. Well, guess what? Good chance it might happen this time. And think about that. I mean, it opens the door, and I debated this on the floor of the assembly. You are going to vote, and then they're going to put your ballot with your name on it and an envelope and put it in the stack and wait for you to come back and right the wrong. Who's to say what happens to that stack in the back? I may know now how you voted.
Sir?
On the comment of keeping DMVs open longer, I mean, right there, isn't that going to cost the state more money? We've got a party that's so fiscally responsible. Who's going to be paying for those longer hours and stuff?
Well, they're not going to do it.
Well, that's just the point. If it was there, then they'd see that, oh, now it is costing to implement this new voter ID. I remember hearing numbers of 2 million to 4 million possibly to in the long range that is going to cost the state.
It was going to be $2 million to first get it started, and then I think something like $1 million a year to continue. And the number of they say that they've issued since 2011 when this law was passed, that they've issued close to the 300,000. That includes all of us who have renewed our driver's license since then. They don't even they don't tell you what these numbers mean. And they don't tell you what they normally would expect in a 3-year period.
Wouldn't another roadblock be that the DMV may be miles and miles and miles away?
Yes, indeed.
Some people aren't going to have easy access to these DMVs.
Well, and especially if you don't have
nowhere.
And if you don't have a driver's license, you can't drive. You're disabled or elderly. You have to arrange transportation there, and you have to tell that transport ahead of time when you're going to come back. Well, we all know what it's like when you're at the DMV. You don't know how long you'll be there. You may zip right through, or it may take some time. The former president of our Ashland Bayfield League got married and changed her name. So she went to the DMV in Ashland, which was open every other Friday morning. She went to change her name and on her registration, and their computers were down. So then she was going to have to wait 2 weeks to go again. Well, you can see that before an election, something like that can make all the difference.
Sounds like Ellie.
Yes, I have been clerk of election many, many times. I have canvassed an election of a very contentious election. And I have never yet had a case that I would say was voter fraud. Never, ever one in Rock County. Now, maybe every other county in the state is crawling with.
Well, we talk about the Harry Potter bus. They say there are buses of people who are going and voting illegally. It's always buses, and nobody ever sees them. There was, the cases of illegal voting that have actually held up to any kind of investigation in this state have been either registration fraud, where a registrar writes a name on, but nobody ever really expected to vote there. Or they've been felons who are still on papers who vote, and they often don't know they're not supposed to. I mean, one guy went, in the afternoon, he went to his probation officer, a meeting with his probation officer with an I voted sticker on. He thought he did the right thing, you know. But, so I think you could address that problem by re-enfranchising felons who aren't incarcerated. But, and there's been one or two cases of somebody who's voted twice, and it's been a case, like there was one where it was a couple who owned houses in 2 counties and thought they should be able to vote in 2 counties. So it's, you know,
And they got caught.
And they got caught, and the system catches people, yes. It's really very difficult to commit illegal voting in this state. We stay away from the F word if we
did
can.
have one person who voted for Pat Paulson.
Paulson, Pat Paulson, oh yeah.
So, you know, years ago. But, so, you know, is that voter fraud? I mean, somebody stupid.
No, it's a wasted vote is what that is.